Ba-ba-da-ba! Shovel Knight, a game that began when a group of former Wayforward developers launched a Kickstarter on May 17th, 2013 with the promise of an old-school 2D platformer and one simple question.
Can you dig it?
Turns out people could indeed dig it, as the campaign was a massive success, surpassing the initial $75,000 goal and reaching over $311,000 by April 13th. Just a bit more than a year later, Shovel Knight was released on 3DS, Wii U, and PC before making its way to, like, every other major system, and the Vita, where I first played it. I specifically remember downloading the original version of the game before Plague of Shadows was released, and I was hooked. This game was the only thing I played on my Vita for a solid month. I just couldn't put it down, and I'd later buy it from both my PS3 and PS4. And I kind of want to buy the Switch version to track down the amiibo. I might have a problem. A full decade later, we have 3 additional campaigns starring some of the boss characters, 2 spin-offs, a fighting game mode, a board game. Oh, okay. More cameos than you can shake your shovel at, a collaboration with Arby's in 2021. Wait, what? And a total package I'm confident saying is one of my absolute favorite games of all time. Shovel Knight wasn't the first successful Kickstarter campaign, it wasn't the first successful indie game, but its simple promise and immaculate design struck a chord with millions of people, myself clearly included, and it almost feels like the starting point to indie games really taking a bigger chunk of the treasure that is the gaming public's attention. Today, I want to look back on it all and see if I can unearth the reasons this game is such a shining gem. All 4 campaigns, the fighting mode, the spin-offs, the adaptations, everything, except that Arby's thing, that's very weird. So gear up in some colorful armor and grab your nearest piece of gardening equipment. We're going to strike the earth and dig up some gold in Shovel Knight. The original campaign for Shovel Knight, which has since been subtitled Shovel of Hope, tells the story of the titular Trowel Paladin himself, venturing across the lands with his trusty partner Shield Knight on the hunt for treasure. However, after a strange amulet in the Tower of Fate causes her to disappear, he gives up the adventurer's life in his grief. Now there's a powerful being called the Enchantress conquering the land with the help of her Order of No Quarter, leaving it up to our hero to pick up his shovel. I mean, I guess he already had it, because, farming. But you know what I mean. Battle across the kingdom, take down the evil knights, and stop the Enchantress. With that, go. A simple premise for a simple game, and that's all you need to get going. What, were you expecting something deep? It's a game about a knight whose main weapon is a shovel. Go to Disco Elysium if you want a complex world and engrossing narrative dripping with philosophical inspirations. We have no place for that here. In Shovel Knight, you play as a warrior wielding a landscaping tool who goes to stop some massive imposing force in a variety of themed levels. What more could you want? Not to say the story has no underlying value, the scenes where Shovel dreams of catching a falling Shield Knight while fighting off increasingly large groups of baddies is a good bit of foreshadowing and helps illustrate how desperate he is to save his friend. Then there's Black Knight functioning as his rival, who clearly has some kind of history with the pair, and the same can be said of Polar Knight, but none of that really matters. None of that really matters. The story's there, it works, and what little we see of the characters makes them endearing, if not particularly deep. Now, Yacht Club Games knows you're here for hot platforming action, not high-minded musings on the concepts of entropic decay and an individual's place in a modern society that seems to be degrading by the minute. Hey, check out this jump! Once you see the opening cutscene, you jump right into the first stage. This intro stage is fantastic because it gives you everything you need to know about controlling Shovel Knight. Your moveset is extremely limited by today's standards, but perfect for an 8-bit game. All you can do is jump, attack enemies, with the attack also doubling as a way to dig up piles of treasure, and of course, the legendary Shovel Drop. The glorious Shovel Drop will be one of your main methods of platforming. All you do is hold down while in the air and use the shovel blade like a pogo stick. Somehow. Don't ask me how that works, I'm an art major, not a physicist. This move is so satisfying as a core mechanic, as it blends platforming and combat well together because, you're using the same tool for both aspects of traversal. Bouncing from point to point is something this game makes you do a lot, whether keeping yourself above bottomless pits or hitting an enemy like this dragon that breathes bubbles. What, did it eat a crate of soap? It isn't the only skill they test you on, but it is one of the most heavily relied upon, and it helps how smoothly this game controls. You run at a perfect pace with, quick mention, a really cute sprite animation, and jumping is on point. After the first level, you'll be able to know exactly where you'll be and land jumps with confidence, which is pretty important in a game where jumping is pretty much all you do. Maybe it's just because I've played this game like, I don't know, like 25 times or something like that, but I think the controls are basically perfect. Shovel Knight is just so much fun to move around, and I always melt into the experience whenever I go through this campaign again because it's so smooth. Like Santana. Well, with the controls understood, you get your first pick of the levels. The overworld is divided into 4 sections with 3 main levels in each, and the first 2 gives you the choice between Pridemore Keep and the Lich Yard. I always go for Pridemore Keep, personally, because it means I get to beat up King Knight, and that's all the reason I need. The Order of No Quarter consists of 8 knights, each with a vastly different theme and matching level. There's King Knight, like I said, Specter Knight watching over the Lich Yard, Plague Knight experimenting in the Explodatorium, that's a great name, Mole Knight excavating the Lost City, Treasure Knight stashing gold in the Iron Whale, Tinker Knight toiling away at Clockwork Tower, Polar Knight being a mood bag in the stranded ship, and Propeller Knight flitting about the flying machine. Unlike a certain obvious inspirations we'll get to later, you can't access any level from the start. There are these little locks on the overworld that get cleared when you beat the corresponding level, letting you reach the next batch of challenges. I really like this as a method of progression since it gives you enough wiggle room to tackle stages in the order you want, but it also staggers them out for increasing difficulty. You know, letting you pick whatever you want from the offset means everything kind of has to have the same level of challenge, so progression doesn't feel like you're really getting anywhere. But with this tiered overworld, they increase the difficulty for some stages without risking people jumping into something too overwhelming. There were a lot of ings in that sentence, jeez.
We like ings.
And buddy, pal, friend, dude, general acquaintance. Let me tell you, these levels are so much fun. They're very true to old NES titles in the sense most of the challenge comes from single screen obstacle courses strung back to back with the occasional longer set piece. Shift over a screen, get a quick glance at everything, your mind starts zipping to the solution, and it just feels, man, it's so good. Jumping around and passing the game's challenges without a scratch is super gratifying, and every level just being a sequence of those makes them very fun to experience. The flow of this game is so good, it would make Pearl Jam jealous. What makes them even better is how each level has its own gimmick, usually in the form of some new stage obstacle that matches the theme. You know, the stranded ship is the snow level, so it has slippery ice platforms. It also has a rainbow puking statue. Alright, sure, why not? The Lich Yard has these sections where the sprites and platforms are blacked out, only giving you brief glimpses when lightning strikes, along with ghost enemies that can't be killed by regular attacks. The Lost City is underground, so it has a bunch of lava hazards and plenty of I think the flying machine is my favorite level out of all of them, having your body carried by the wind and bouncing between cannonballs. If you'd like something to spice up your typical running, jumping, and bouncing, you can collect the relics. These are special items that perform some kind of ability, usually just giving you a new attack. And I'll be honest, if there's one thing I've grown to not like about this game very much, it's these relics. Most of them are kinda useless, or at least are so niche they aren't worth using. At least they're optional to get, and it isn't like bosses have weaknesses to specific relics. Well, except Tinker Knight. Mobile gear. Oh, the Shagohod? The Shovel Hod? Whenever I replay this game, which is a lot, may I remind you, I only ever use like 3 of them. The Flare Wand, because having a ranged weapon is nice, the Propeller Dagger gives you a cool dash attack, and the Phase Locket makes you immune to all damage for like 5 seconds. But stuff like the Alchemy Coin, or the Dust Knuckles, remember the War Horn? Bet not. Man, most of these are so contextual, they feel more like gimmicks rather than extensions to your abilities. Like, why would you use the Chaos Sphere to attack something below you when your main skill is attacking things below you? I remember my first few playthroughs, I would use the Troupple Chalices pretty often. Pretty great one-use ability items, but I don't think I used them at all in my playthrough here. Still, praise be to the Troupple King, Lord of Fish, Fruit, and the Dance. Get down, you little ma, what a fool, little I really really like this game's world. It's a good combination of silly and sincere. You have anthropomorphized animals walking around as regular people. This goat sells you meal tickets to increase your health. A dancer will give you a bit of a show after you beat Specter Knight. You get relics from a merchant named Chester hiding inside treasure chests. I love how Shovel Knight can just repeatedly tell this grumpy frog bad jokes. It's stupidly charming. But while it is silly, it doesn't feel like a parody or the writers are trying to make fun of fantasy concepts. This is gonna be kind of a bizarre example, but it reminds me of like that Neopets PS2 game, if you've ever played that. You know, it's goofy, they're trying to be lighthearted, but everything's done with a sense of earnestness that makes it endearing, and I will take that any day over constant snark and winking to the camera like cynicism is supposed to be funny in and of itself. But because Shovel Knight treats its world with the degree of seriousness, it actually does feel like a grand journey as you make your way closer to the tower. I like the exchanges you have with the Order Knights. Polar Knight even seems to have some kind of history with Shovel Knight, hinting at a deep connection tinted with bitter memories. Come on, he even uses a snow shovel. That's amazing. I love that. Then there's Black Knight, Shovel Knight's equivalent to characters like Proto Man or Meta Knight, your rival with similar abilities that pops up to test your skill. The growing tension between the two and their mission to save Shield Knight is treated as seriously as anything else, and it works despite how limited the dialogue is. Even the little villages you stop through between major levels are super charming. These are great, and very evocative of Yacht Club games' influences. This is actually something I find particularly interesting about Shovel Knight in comparison to a lot of retro-styled indie games that came out after. The developers are not shy at all about their inspirations. I've even found a few interviews where they specifically point out where they borrowed certain ideas and elements. Plenty of people say the shovel bounces from DuckTales, but they made it clear your general moveset is derived from Zelda 2 of all things. Yeah, the game that's considered the black sheep of one of the most overrated franchises of all time inspired one of the best indie games ever made. Go figure. DuckTales DNA is still in the game, but in the form of all the treasure collecting and exploring areas for hidden nooks and crannies that contain more gold. You don't get a special ending for doing so, but you can spend it on upgrading your shovel blade or buying new sets of armor. Although let's be honest, the Dynamo Mail is the only one worth buying. Unless you're like me and buy the Golden Mail because the flipping animation is really cool. The overworld is an obvious callback to Super Mario Bros. 3, but the level design itself is a lot more like classic Mega Man. Even the relics, they're meant to resemble all the special tools used by Trevor Belmont in Castlevania 3. Shovel Knight is a stew of different concepts, ideas, and systems cherry-picked from NES classics, almost like they took a list of 8-bit titles and shoved them in a blender. But the important thing that separates Shovel Knight from so many of its contemporaries is how Shovel Knight is Shovel Knight. That's gonna be weird. Okay, let me explain. See, one problem I find with so many indie games, especially in the wake of Shovel Knight kind of igniting this passion for retro callbacks, is how developers take ideas from games they like and simply repeat them. They try to be the next Zelda, or a Mario, or Banjo, or Earthbound, or Symphony of the Night, and every time, I'm just reminded of that old saying by Frank Zappa about how the world will die from either nuclear war or nostalgia. You know, it's all well and good to enjoy things you know and are familiar with, but if you never move on from them, you never make any progress. You just stagnate. Creativity requires iteration and inspiration. It does no one any good to just repeat beats you heard from works of the past. Even in recent years, with notable developers leaving companies to crowdfund successors to their older works like Bloodstained and Armed Fantasia, they know they can't just rehash what they've already done and act like it's enough. They add to it, remix it, make it something fresh by virtue of new twists and interpretations. Even Wimpy Number No kind of succeeds by virtue of attempting something different. Sure, the game sucks beach balls through a crazy straw, but, you know, they tried. Maybe. You can even see this in a few big-name titles. I can't tell you how disappointed I was with Octopath Traveler when I played it, and it was just a rehash of basic, played-out story concepts from decades prior. But in the sequel, they kept it feeling old school while improving the characters and having more intriguing storylines. Seriously, Octopath 2 is really, really good. I don't want to see just someone else reuse ideas they picked up from things they enjoy. I want to see them take what they like and find cool new ways to utilize them. And that's what Shovel Knight does that makes it stand out even after 10 years of other indies loading the market with derivative concepts. I've certainly played a few games that feel more like throwing a new coat of paint on something I already know instead of a title with its own identity. It isn't even like recreating things you enjoy is an outright bad thing. Plenty of good works have been crafted from people letting their inspirations fully carve their vision. But works created in such a way don't really let the creator show the ideas only they can bring to the table, especially when you're trying to make something to draw in fans of older games. The end result probably won't resonate with anyone who doesn't have some established history with the genre. So while Shovel Knight does explicitly take bits and pieces of older games, you don't need to be some old head OG 8-bit veteran to have fun playing it. Heck, I never even played any NES games before I picked up Shovel Knight. I played it because it looked fun. And it is fun. Lots of fun. I enjoyed it so much when I first played it, I probably have it to thank for my interest in indie and retro games that aren't just JRPGs. I've been slowly working my way through the old Mega Man games, and I've been enjoying those too without any kind of familiarity. This is a retro game made with modern minds. You can even tell through the presentation. Yeah, it's styled like an 8-bit title, and they mostly work within the limitations of the NES, but they gave themselves a bit of wiggle room to make things really pop. The color palette is the same as the NES, with only 4 extra colors added for more interesting visuals. Each sprite only uses 5 colors, including the black they use for outlines. It isn't quite the same as NES sprites, which could only use 4 colors and often use tricks to give the illusion of greater detail, like how Bowser was only shown in front of a black background because they already used 4 colors to form his body. Giving themselves that single extra color allows characters to have greater detail while maintaining the simple visual style. The animations are also better than you can find on 8-bit systems, still using a small number of frames, but enough to make them look smooth. They can also put a bunch more characters on screen at once without turning the game into an absolute slideshow like old systems used to when things got too hectic. This game has parallax scrolling! Okay? They couldn't process that space-age visual tech in 1985, but they put it in here because the devs weren't trying to slavishly devote themselves to old hardware. Some of the backgrounds in this game, by the way, are just gorgeous. Another reason why Flying Machine is my favorite level. This lovely sunset, occasionally interrupted by castles or other airships, provides such a great atmosphere in the battle with Propeller Knight. And of course, how can anyone talk about Shovel Knight without mentioning its amazing soundtrack by Jake Kaufman? Also, I checked, he isn't related to Lloyd Kaufman as far as I can tell. I'm no music expert, but you just need to listen to some of these tracks to know how skilled Mr. Kaufman is. The songs fit their levels so well, and they have this energetic feel that pumps you up to dig through all the challenges. Here, I'll play a few of my favorites and you can hear for yourself. That's not to say all of the tracks are action-oriented, since some of the best tunes are more atmospheric and melancholic, like the trek through the Tower of Fate. Spoilers ahead, skip to the time on screen now if you would like to avoid them. After wrecking the Order of No Quarter, Shovel Knight starts his climb up the Tower of Fate. Think of these stages like the equivalent of Wily Castles from the old Mega Man games, a lengthy gauntlet combining obstacles from all previous levels. Continuity be darned. You got the falling platforms from the Flying Machine, the section of Total Darkness from the Lich Yard, and the Magic Book platforms from Primor Keep, among others. I remember finding this section pretty tough the first few times I played it, but by now, I have it down pat. The rain effect going on in the background is super cool, by the way, really adds to the dour atmosphere. At the end of the first stage, you encounter Black Knight, who's overtaken by the Enchantress's dark powers, and there's one final rival battle between him and Shovel Knight. Except now, he's got wings and launches giant meteors at you, because of course he does. This fight's pretty great, definitely a highlight, and once again, the music is fantastic. Once you beat him, they have an exchange about saving someone lost long ago. It isn't difficult to tell they're talking about Shield Knight, but it's pretty interesting how the rival is essentially sharing your goal. The second section ends with Shovel Knight crashing the Order's dinner, leading to a boss rush. Kind of lame, but I do like how you can choose to save them all from falling off the tower when you're done. I always make sure to do this, it just feels like something Shovel Knight would do. With the Order taken care of for good, Shovel Knight marches his way to the Enchantress's lair, finding her perched in a window as she looks out at the stormy night. He calls out to her and reveals she's actually Shield Knight, corrupted by the magic of the tower into an entirely different form. Since words clearly won't break the curse, a battle ensues. Even with how many times I played this game, this final battle is kind of tough. It takes place on a large floor of destructible blocks, so bouncing on them with your shovel breaks them away, and the Enchantress shoots huge fireballs that clear whole columns of them in one sweep. Combined with the knockback, it makes for a treacherous fight that combines platforming with the combat wonderfully. After defeating her, Shield Knight is released from the tower's influence and falls to the floor, mirroring the dream sequences seen over the course of your adventure. However, with the amulet containing the tower's magic shattered, the embodiment of its dark force comes down to battle the pair. The final battle has you team up with Shield Knight, showing she's a capable warrior and the best partner for Shovel Knight by using her shield to make a platform and launch you up to the boss. Probably not my favorite boss fight in the game, but definitely up there. But even with their abilities combined, the pair are not able to fully defeat the entity. Shovel Knight is knocked out and removed from the crumbling tower by Black Knight as Shield Knight holds off another magic blast. The game ends with the tower being decimated, the kingdom cheering, and Shovel Knight being placed next to his campfire to recover. We see a post-game sequence showing what happened to all the other Order members, which is very cute, and one final scene showing Shield Knight making her way to Shovel as their journey finally ends. Shovel Knight is an absolute joy. Everything about it is so tightly designed and sharp, from the visuals to the music to how the levels are designed to get the most out of your simple moveset. It's just so much fun to play. I picked it up on an absolute whim 10 years ago, and each time I find myself enjoying it just a bit more, whether in how it's designed, the little details in the presentation, or just trying some gear I hadn't really bothered with before. It's a linear journey, but it's densely packed with quality and options, and there are all sorts of little things that make it charming. There are traveling warriors that pop up for extra fights, including the prolific Baz. You have bonus boss fights depending on the version you play, with Kratos being on the PlayStation version and the Battletoads on Xbox. I guess that makes sense. That's still very weird to think about. And if you beat Kratos, you can even buy the Chaos Armor to get new attack animations. How cool is that? I mean, sure, it's based on a notorious delusional mass murderer, but hey, new animations are pretty cool. The Nintendo versions have special interactions with amiibos, like a custom mode for Shovel of Hope and little avatars following you around. They put in a ton of cheat codes you can enter on the name entry screen, ranging from God mode to making you huge to altering aspects of difficulty, and even innocuous stuff that doesn't actually do anything, like changing color palettes or swapping some words of text with butt. Speaking of swapping, there's the body swap mode that allows you to change text and sprites for characters between male and female designs. They'll even change some names to follow suit, like King Knight becoming Queen Knight. I really like that. So that means you can make this a story of our fair maiden Shovel Knight rescuing her girlfriend from a clique of mean girls. Happy Pride Month, everyone. Also, Girl Tinker Knight just has pigtails, and that's adorable. I love that. Sad we didn't get to see the Troupple Queen realize the concept art is adorable. And that's the original Shovel Knight campaign, an in-joke turned passion project turned indie darling turned absolute smash hit. A culmination of high-quality design and hand-picked elements from the developer's inspirations, all working in tandem to make something truly special. Most of my praise for Shovel of Hope can be almost directly applied to the other campaigns, and Yacht Club would iterate and develop new and fresh concepts with the baseline established with the first title to create new experiences just as strong. Mostly. Oh, and literally while I was writing this script, Yacht Club announced Shovel of Hope DX, a new version of the original game with a bunch of added features, but I'm not gonna talk about the specifics of that. I'm just gonna move on. Okay, so I don't think it would be a spicy tamale to say Plague of Shadows is the worst Shovel Knight campaign. Keep in mind, I'm saying that in comparison to Shovel of Hope, Specter of Torment, and King of Cards. This is more a case of seeing a B- in a class of A+ as opposed to like an F. Released as DLC on September 17th, 2015, Plague of Shadows sees you playing as Plague Knight in a story taking place parallel to the original. Plague Knight, accompanied by his assistant Mona, has already joined the Order and is assisting them in keeping the kingdom under their rule. However, he has his own agenda that involves extracting the essences of his allies and Shovel Knight in order to create a potion of ultimate power. So, yeah, go do that. You go, bird. I don't think the setup is as strong as Shovel of Hope. It's more vague and selfish as opposed to the more immediate task of rescuing a friend while saving the kingdom. It isn't terrible, and I know the plot doesn't matter for games like this very much, but I think it's worth mentioning. I will say, this campaign does much more at characterization than Shovel of Hope, with more lines of dialogue letting the personality shine through. Plague Knight's just such a goblin of a human being. I think he's human, at least. Kind of hard to tell in this world. He could be an actual crow under that mask for all we know. His journey to gather everyone's essences progresses in a way that makes him feel a bit more realized than Shovel Knight, especially when it's revealed why he wants the potion. Spoilers! Kind of. What I'm about to discuss is really obvious very early on, but hop to here if you don't want to hear the best part of the game. See, his real reason for wanting the potion isn't to conquer the world or usurp the Enchantress, but because he has a crush on Mona and doesn't think he's worth being with her as he is right now. Despite being a brilliant alchemist and one of the knights currently subjugating the kingdom, he has such a complex about himself he can't muster the courage to just confess. See, this is what happens when people keep dunking on short people on social media. Someone decides to fight their friends for volatile materials. Come on, Plague Dog, she's clearly into you. They even wrote in scenes where she flirts with you, but you're too blinded by your own perceived inadequacies to see that. I wasn't kidding when I said this was the best part of the game. Certainly the best part of the plot. I'm a sucker for romance stories, as evident by all the shoujo manga on my shelf, so seeing the interactions between Plague Knight and Mona is right up my alley. Especially the gossip drama with Mona thinking Plague actually has a thing for the Magicist, but the Magicist totes isn't into Plague Knight, but because Plague is being all sketchy, Mona's all peace out and bounces for shizzle. I think I know what I just said. Best part of all this, Plague Knight actually learns how to dance from the Troupple King, and at any point in the game afterward, you can just hold down to make him dance. But if you're in the same room as Mona, he'll be too embarrassed. That's great. Spoilers over, for what it's worth. So here's why this is probably the worst campaign of the four. Plague Knight's platforming gimmick. Sickness Warrior, much like Shovel Knight, uses his weapon for both attacking and traversal. Instead of a melee, you have throwable bombs, and if you've seen my channel, you know I should dig this concept like a shallow grave dug with C4. And it is really cool how you can purchase customization options as the game goes on, so your bombs can do all sorts of different things. But I don't think it works very well. First off, having a lobbed range weapon can be really awkward to use even with the diagonal throw you get in midair. Like, yeah, you can customize several aspects, like how you throw it and what happens when it explodes, even when it decides to go off, but A, you might have to gather a bunch of cipher coins to even get an option you like in the shop, and by the time you get to that option, you're probably more than used to something you already have. And B, no matter what you pick, you're gonna have difficulties dealing with specific obstacles. Ironically, the best thing to do is just keep the basic configuration and maybe switch to the lob casing for aerial enemies. I do at least like the powder that combines 3 bombs into one huge explosion, but even it has its issues and just kind of makes it a bit finicky. It's a fun idea to mess around with, but once you have your preferred combination down, there really isn't much reason to change it up. But that's not the aspect of the game that really broils my pears. No, it's what happens when you hold down the attack button, the bomb jump. This is essentially Plague Knight's equivalent to the shovel bounce, the platforming trick that uses his weapon. After holding down the attack button, Plague Knight will start flashing, promptly being thrown in jail for indecent exposure, and then propel himself forward with an explosion. It's basically like the high jump from Mario 2, but for distance instead of height. You can alter the way he explodes, with my personal favorite being the float, allowing for more precise platforming because, oh sweet sassafras, do you need more control? The bomb jump doesn't offer the same satisfying simplicity and implementation of the shovel drop. You know why the shovel drop is so good as a platforming move? Because it's a technique that works on both horizontal and vertical movement. They can design levels around implementing 4 directions of obstacles, and since it isn't hard to do and the bounce arc is so steady and predictable, it's a very easy tool for a platforming arsenal. But the bomb jump feels a bit looser, a bit more chaotic, which, I guess suits Plague Knight as a character, but it doesn't translate to great game feel. He hops across the screen so quickly, I know I'd miss a ton of jumps if I didn't have the float. And I know that because it happened a lot. Yes, this jump does have a predictable arc, but good luck judging distance as easily as with Shovel Knight. Not just that, but it's a skill that only works with horizontal movement. It might add a bit of height to Plague's pseudo double jump, but it's primarily used to jump long distances. And since it's both a more deliberate move that can't be repeated until you touch land and only works for distance, it absolutely decimates the potential for level design. Which would be a lot worse if you weren't going through mostly the same levels. Yeah, the levels in this campaign are maybe like 83% the same as in Shovel of Hope. Even the overworld map is the same. There aren't even many new music tracks, and the boss battles are all the same, save for the ones you have against Shovel Knight. So not only are we going through basically the same levels as before, we're doing it with a worse character. There are some sections designed specifically for Plague Knight, but since I don't think Bomb Jump is as fun as Shovel's moveset, they just don't feel the same quality. That's not to say Plague of Shadows is completely awful. I still enjoyed playing it through for this video. As pointless as it is when you really think about it, the custom potions are a really cool idea, and seeing your choices change this visual is a great detail. Even though Plague Knight's abilities aren't as gratifying as Shovel's, blasting through levels can still be fun with this more controlled chaos style of play. His equivalent to the relics, Arcanas, are mostly just more explosions. Yes, that's a positive. It's cool how you don't find your Arcana right away in the stage like before, instead giving you the chance to find Shovel Knight's relics to trade to Chester, where the relics would be in the first game. Pretty neat. I like how Plague Knight can't go into towns for, well, obvious reasons, so he has an underground laboratory. You know, I don't think Plague of Shadows is entirely a bad campaign. If I get into the groove, I can enjoy myself enough, and I did have fun playing it for this review. But will I ever play it again on my own time? Maybe, but honestly, probably not, because I already have a better, less awkward version in Shovel of Hope, because again, this is basically the same campaign as Shovel of Hope, right down to the fight with Black Knight and the boss rush at the Tower of Fate. Spoilers again, you know the drill, time on screen. Determined to finish the potion and be deserving of Mona's love, Plague Knight climbs the tower to gather the essence of the Enchantress. And like I mentioned, get in a boss rush with his companions, ending in a battle with Shovel Knight that results in all of the Order members hanging off the ledge. No worries, I'm sure he'll... Hey, where are you going? You dirt-slinging twazit, get back here! Okay, well, after Selfish Knob leaves the scene, we make our way to the Enchantress for, you guessed it, a battle just like the one from the first campaign. However, after we beat her and extract her essence, Black Knight arrives with Mona, telling Plague Knight she already loves him. Right after this revelation, the completed potion goes haywire, possessing Mona into a... Oh, cool, it's using the female version of Plague Knight from the body swap mode. That's a fun detail. Anyway, you fight her in a mirror match, which is total chaos, and then the potion's power manifests as whatever this thing is, giant demon Plague Knight, sure. This is by far the hardest battle in the game, with the monster splitting into two bodies that attack in different ways, offering small chances to even hurt it, and pelting you with all sorts of projectiles. Lob casings are stupidly useful here, by the way. Once it's brought down, Plague Knight and Mona reconcile their feelings for one another, commemorating the event by detonating the tower with the ultimate potion. Easily the best confession since Yoda of the Dawn. Oh. Never mind. We get pretty much the same ending sequence as before, showing the Order of No Quarter members after their dissolution, although it's weird some of them are different to Shovel of Hope's ending. I will say though, seeing Plague Knight and Mona having dinner on the flying machine while Propeller Knight serves as their waiter, that's fantastic. 12 out of 10, 5 stars. And then after the credits, you see... I absolutely love this moment. It makes the whole adventure worth it just to see this. And as these two lovebirds dance into the night, I'm left with time to reflect on my feelings towards this campaign. You know, I feel like I come across a bit harsh during this section. I do have a good few issues with Plague of Shadows, between the more slow burn story, the awkward bomb jumping, making platforming just a little bit less enjoyable, the level design being mostly copy and paste from Shovel Knight. It might seem like I hate this campaign. Sure, if I was given the option of either this or any of the other stories, I'd pick the others with no questions asked. This just doesn't strike the same chords for me. It's a bit too chaotic and experimental, which again, you know, Plague Knight, that makes sense. This campaign has several cool ideas, like the bomb customization and... Actually, no, that's like the coolest idea. I think the reason it's so similar to the original game is because it's the first DLC story. The developers weren't entirely clear on what they could do to expand their concepts for these boss characters. It's still fun, and there are some aspects I genuinely really enjoy, but if I return to Shovel Knight at all, this is far from my first choice. Definitely worth playing if you already have the treasure trove. I mean, it's literally packaged with every copy of the game now, so it isn't like you're losing anything to try it out yourself. And one such person who's tried it is Wolf Chaos-san, so have any words for us?
Shovel Knight is a great freaking game. I instantly fell in love with its world and level design. The music's phenomenal, and I have quite a few tracks saved in my video editing playlist. But my favorite thing Shovel Knight had to offer was its characters, most notably the knights. However, there was one knight I immediately clung to and decided, you're my favorite. That being Plague Knight. Also, Polar Knight is a close second. Dude deserves more love. So when I saw that Yacht Club was going to release a DLC where I got to play as this, Plague homie, I was ecstatic. I couldn't wait to play as this loony alchemist. Plague of Shadows dropped, and I gotta say, it's pretty alright. Plague Knight gives off main character in an Invader Zim-esque cartoon vibes. He's chaotic, adorable, expressive, and reckless. Watching Plague Knight's villainous traits melt away as he becomes a flustered mess around Mona is so freaking cute, dude. I absolutely adore that this expansion story revolves around romance. The levels you go through are the same ones you've been to while playing as Shovel Knight, with a few new platforming challenges and enemy placement changes, but playing as Plague Knight allows you to tackle each level in a new, unique way. Plague Knight's moveset is incredibly fun. Little dude has this move called Bomb Burst, which allows you to give Plague Knight an extra boost or burst outside of his jumps, which can lead you to skipping platforming sections altogether that you might have been struggling with before. I love trying to speedrun these levels and seeing what kind of crazy jumping combo I could do to advance forward. And the ability to just spam bombs as I'm falling down a hole as I try to save myself is so incredibly satisfying. For once, panicking in a game worked out to my advantage. Bomb bursting makes some of the harder platforming moments go by with a breeze. Heck, you can make quick work of enemies that you may have struggled with once forever ago because these bombs are just, they're great. They're awesome. I literally could like go into a very long exposition as to why they're so great. Just know that they are. Freaking love bombs. I honestly love to mess around with bomb bursting to the point where I could just pull off some really neat jumps and skip over parts of a level because of the trajectory that I just, somehow made happen. It's incredibly satisfying when you pull off a stunt you didn't even mean to do. Also, there's these collectible green coins throughout the stages, so if you want to snatch them, you have to learn how to properly platform with these movesets rather than just, throwing caution to the wind and saying, I guess I'll see what happens. Though, as much as I enjoy Plague Knight's movement, this DLC left me wanting more. Outside of the romance story and moveset, it felt very much like New Game Plus. Wish there would have been more, new bosses rather than having the same ones in the OG Shovel Knight campaign, outside of the final boss, but that's more on the spoiler territory, and that's probably my biggest complaint. This just felt like retreading the same path. There's little to no surprises in terms of enemies, bosses, and even level design, honestly. There are some small changes here and there to better account for Plague Knight's moveset, but overall I kept thinking to myself, well, I remembered this level. It reminds me how Sonic Adventure, after you complete the story with Sonic, you were able to play those levels again, but this time as Tails. The levels remain mostly the same, but now you had different abilities. And yes, I know there's much more that goes into, those levels and the design of Sonic Adventure, but you get the idea. It's an initial feel, not a one-to-one comparison. Anyway, again, this isn't a bad DLC by any means. I had fun with it, and I adore the romance plot, but compared to the other DLCs that Shovel Knight has, this definitely is on, the lower tier list. It's a good time, but it pales in comparison to the other DLCs. I still love my boy Plague Knight, though. Hashtag Plague Knight did nothing wrong.
With their first DLC completed, Yacht Club Games received feedback and got to work on the next promised story. But would it live up to the original campaign? Yeah, no question. The next one's awesome. Alright, hopping from arguably the worst campaign of the lot to possibly the best. Released on March 3rd, 2017, Specter of Torment puts you in the rusty shoes of the Order's resident Simple Plan fan, Specter Knight. I would have said Linkin Park, but he has no skin from which wounds may not heal, and this game's story explains why. It's a prequel showing not only how Specter Knight gathered together the Order members at the command of the Enchantress, but also how he ended up in his current form in the first place. This is by far the most serious, plot-focused campaign of the series, with more cutscenes and character development than really any other title, and it's a somber ride the whole way through. See, Specter Knight was originally a thief named Donovan, who went on jobs with his partner Luan. How you choose to interpret partner is entirely up to you. Happy Pride Month, everyone! As the story unfolds and we get more peeks into Specter's past, it becomes clear he isn't really a villain, but more a good-hearted rogue fate chewed up and spat onto the floor of a car park. This guy just could not catch a break when he was alive. Or in death. Things are just awful for him. In their hunt for a powerful amulet, the very same one mentioned in the opening cutscene of Shovel of Hope, Donovan and Luan encountered Shield Knight at the Tower of Fate. After their battle, we witnessed the burst of magic power that brought about the Enchantress, which killed Luan in the process and brought Donovan to the brink of death. In his final moments, reflecting on the promise he made with his most trusted companion, he accepts the Enchantress's offer to become her undead liege, becoming the ghoulish warrior we all know until he can gather enough power to bring himself back to life. So I think it's safe to say this game's tone is a good bit bit more serious than previously, focusing more on Specter's tragic backstory and total emo loner status because he's so tortured inside. I mean, come on. Whenever you finish a stage, he's brooding on the castle wall. He's basically Ninja Grim Reaper Batman, which actually makes a lot more sense when you look at how he plays. He genuinely is a bit like a combination between the Batman NES game and Ninja Gaiden, although specifically the 3D Ninja Gaidens, because Yacht Club gave Specter one of the coolest techniques in the whole series, the dash slash. While in the air, if you get within range of an enemy or attackable object, a diagonal line will appear on the nearest target. Hit the attack button and Specter does his best anime swordsman impression, dashing across the opposite corner of the target while slicing through them. We are basically playing the most anime character ever put in an 8-bit styled game. Don't believe me? He can slice through cannonballs. He's basically Marilyn Manson doing his best Roronoa Zoro impression, but he dressed as a Grim Reaper because katanas don't have enough edge. This slash move is just so gratifying to use. It's probably my favorite platforming technique of the 4 playable characters. Something really interesting about its design is how, much like the shovel drop being applied to orthogonal directions, the dash slash works on the diagonal, and more actively to boot. It's much faster, more immediate, and certainly more violent. You're straight up bisecting enemies, just like the 3D Ninja Gaiden games. That's something I didn't bring up earlier. I really like how Yacht Club cites inspirations outside of the 8-bit era. I mean, the whole dropping money when you die thing is taken from Dark Souls' Darkest of Darkening Dark Darkness. They didn't just keep to the NES. They looked ahead and borrowed from other suitable ideas. Although his other traversal gimmick, running up walls, I'm pretty sure was borrowed from NES Batman, or they at least took it and then made it its own thing. Pretty simple, you just run to a wall, and as long as it isn't specific material he can't stick to, Specter will start running for a few steps before flipping off. During this climb, he can either pull himself onto ledges with a flourishing flip, or jump off to another platform, or even another wall. These techniques ironically make him feel like the liveliest of all the characters, and his levels feel much more energetic as a result to fit the new moveset. Fortunately, Specter's levels aren't copied from the first campaign with minor tweaks, like with Plague of Shadows. No, they're entirely new levels designed around his unique platforming abilities. Probably some of my favorites I played for this video. His moves feel so snappy and satisfying, and any level with these lanterns are a total highlight. You don't break them, you just slash through them to reach higher areas, and when they get on them, they reflect you instead, so you need to bounce yourself off instead of thinking about them just as a diagonal obstacle. It's so cool! The flow of levels is close to Shovel Knight, with the simplistic single-screen obstacle courses strung in one long line, but it's a bit more frenetic. It also uses older obstacles in new ways, like with the Magic Book platforms forming walls to run on and jump off. It makes the design feel much more tailored to Specter Knight. They even change up the boss fights, and they're so much more exciting. Battling Propeller Knight just to have the floor fall out from beneath me and fight him while jumping on airships and free fall, Tinker Knight's mech chasing you down as the inventor flies around for you to strike, Polar Knight expands his arena and sicks his dogs at you while dropping giant icicles. After fighting them all the same way twice, this is a welcome change. I feel like this campaign is designed to be more difficult than the last two, which makes sense given it's the third one they've released, and your character feels more capable than before. Thing is, Specter Knight feels so good to control and the levels are so sharp and clean, at least until I run through drenching everything in blood, I didn't notice things being more challenging. And I've only played this campaign like once before this video. Honestly, I'm kind of having trouble talking about it more because everything I have to say about the design is just it is pretty great. If I have to critique anything, it'd be the same as the previous two titles. The Relic equivalent, this time known as Curios, are just kind of extraneous. I mean, they're totally optional to use, and I did get a good amount of use out of maybe 3 of them. I do really like how you get them though, since instead of just finding them in a chest like the last 2 games, you find these red skulls for a merchant named Red.
How'd you like to own a little bit of my foot in your ass?
I wouldn't, to be quite honest.
It's free.
You're doing it to help him find the skull of his beloved, and I don't know if it's just set in one of the levels permanently or it appears when you get enough overall, but it's really cute when you find it and see them dance together. The developers really do a great job animating these scenes.
Hey, I'm glad I found your wife, but can I leave?
Not until we're done. We've been dying to show you this.
I'd still say Specter has a good lineup of curios if you're interested, much like his armor. I didn't really bring these up in the previous 2 because I just buy like 1 set and call it a day, but I actually have 3 sets I like in this one. I didn't really use one of them, so just ignore that. The Cloak of Clemency, also known as He-Man, which allows you to be saved from pits and spikes, a massive safety cushion I appreciate. Then I used the rail mail to turn any surface into a grind rail. Yeah, if Specter wasn't cool enough, he's also a Tony Hawk fan. Figured out how to use his scythe on special grind rails to move faster, complete with tricks when you hop in the air. It's a shame they don't use these more, but I guess they're designated as the stranded ship gimmick, so no helping that. Something else interesting is how you can pick any level from your home base. There's no overworld this time, and it's the only campaign to do this. Remember how I said the tiered overworld was good because it locked your progression and gave a more satisfying difficulty ramp? Well, now it doesn't have that, and I'm really not sure why. Some levels have more checkpoints than others, so it makes me think they're still supposed to be ordered in some kind of difficulty, but they aren't, and it feels weird. And since you just have the main levels to go through, that means no challenge gauntlets, no treasure stages, no Troupple Lake, no villages. It seems very odd to me to make a linear plot like this, but then give your player free choice on levels that are clearly not designed to be the same level of challenge. Just feels weird considering how deliberately the previous campaigns were laid out. At least the levels look a bit different this time, along with the change in level designs. This dusky sky background in some levels is gorgeous and totally fits the darker tone of the plot and protagonist. The music's been remixed, which is something Plague of Shadows really lacked, and it also fits the style of the game much better than the tracks from the previous titles. They changed up health items to be turkey bones and apple cores since Specter's, dead, and his health is represented through will rather than just being HP. I mean, it really is just flavor, but it's a tasty flavor, so I don't mind. You even get an on-the-spot heal curio, which is fantastic since his resource, darkness, is recharged by killing enemies. And probably the best addition to the game, when you walk to this fox thing at the fire, you can pet it. That's wonderful, and if you don't agree, I'm going to find you and reverse your kneecaps. Anyway, Specter's journey sees him slashing and dashing through the same settings as usual, eventually culminating in a showdown with... Alright, spoilers. Well, you know what to do by now. Time on screen. Okay, so after gathering 7 of the promised 8 knights, Specter is confronted by Black Knight, who just crashes through the wall with his pet turtle rhino thing.
You know, I just finished renovating this place. You could have used the front door. Up yours, Skeletor. Okay, I was trying to be nice, but if you're that rude, I'm not letting you be in the super special secret club for cool dudes. I don't even want... Oh, hey, Shield Knight. You look different. Shield Knight!
Yeah, in case you forgot, Donovan and Luan battled Shield Knight for the amulet, and Specter's still holding a grudge against her, even though he kind of has himself to blame for all this. She's also taken Ray's captive, Luan's son, and the Boomerang Kid you fought in previous campaigns. He crashed into Specter's hideout a while ago, aiming to be the hero, but was corrected by the Enchantress's magic, and has been serving as her subordinate for most of the game. And since Specter promised to protect him, he heads off to confront the scheming sorceress. Just like the last 2 entries, it's a lengthy gauntlet of obstacles compiled from all across the game's other levels. The wall run actually gets kind of annoying here since jumping into walls triggers it, but it's nothing that really takes away from the quality of the stage. At the end of the level, you battle against Black Knight, accompanied this time by his loyal pet Terrorpin. A loyal pet you knock off the platform to his potential death, causing Black Knight to jump after it, you heartless monster. All that's left is the Enchantress herself, and considering I have the dash slash, yeah, she isn't too difficult this time. But once she goes down, she calls in Rays to finish the job. Using her dark powers, she transforms the boy into this metal-looking ghost warrior, crumbling the floor to show the final battle uses the awesome skateboarding rails? Yeah! This fight is genuinely pretty fun since you have to slowly get closer to attack while dodging projectiles and rail hazards, using the lanterns to help change lanes. Again, I wish I did more with the rails because this boss fight shows how great they can be when properly utilized. They didn't even use these in Polar Knight's boss fight. It's kind of a missed opportunity. Once the battle is done and both warriors are spent, the Enchantress comes along, threatening to use the power stored in the amulet to force Rays into being her 8th knight. Without hesitation, Specter Knight offers himself as his replacement, using the amulet's magic to return the boy to normal, keeping his promise to Luan at the cost of serving the one he blames for losing everything. As he takes Rays somewhere safe, the credits show the Order members taking their positions and terrorizing the lands. Except Treasure Knight, who puts on one of those green casino visors as he pays all the minions. Okay, that's really funny. Specter Knight is shown in the Lich Yard, exchanging a few words with Black Knight as he comes to terms with his new position, serving the Enchantress. He hides away the locket that started all this in a treasure chest for safekeep. Oh, sorry about that, Specs. The final shot is a flashback of Donovan and Luan, chatting around the fire and dreaming of a bright future. A future stolen from them on that one fateful day in the tower. Thus ends the tragic tale of Specter Knight, of Donovan, Specter of Torment is probably my favorite campaign in all of Shovel Knight. The story's so much more in-depth and personal, and genuinely makes me feel bad for the state of Specter Knight. His platforming style is so quick and snappy, a total turnaround from Plague of Shadows' more stop-and-start approach. The retouch visuals are a joy to the eye, and the music was changed enough to give it its own flair. Everything they changed for this game makes it feel like enough of a departure from the original game, but familiar enough so you know it's still a Shovel Knight campaign. Honestly, the one thing keeping me from coming back to it as often as I do with Shovel of Hope is just the fact that, well, it feels like too much of an investment for a casual run-through. I play Shovel of Hope over and over because it's simple, to the point, and breezy. Specter of Torment feels more compelling, but also like it asks a bit more of the player. Loads of fun, and I'll definitely play it again, but I don't see myself going back as often as the original game. Still, a definite improvement over the previous campaign. But let's see what Daniel thinks. Dan, any words?
Wait, what are you asking me for? What are you doing in my house? Oh, Specter of Torment friggin' rules. It's easily my favorite one because it has the most interesting gameplay design, and even if it's missing the world map, that doesn't really matter because the gameplay mechanics and gimmicks that it has, I think, makes it the most fun to play.
Feel better soon. Alright, that's 3 stories down and a new peak of quality. Can the final one reach even greater heights? I mean, I don't know. Just keep watching if you want to find out. Okay, so remember everything I talked about with Specter of Torment? Alright, well, take all that, put it in a bag, pick up a hammer, and... Released on December 10th, 2019, a full 5.5 years after the release of the original Shovel Knight, Yacht Club intended for this to be the most ambitious campaign of the lot. Taking place before even Specter of Torment, King of Cards focuses on King Knight before joining the Order as he competes to become champion of a card game. And that's it. Ouch! Man, can you feel that whiplash? It's like they spent all the serious tone they could afford on the previous story, and now we're left with the goofy embers that remain. King of Cards is a total goofball story. Nothing in this game is serious until you reach the very end, and even then, it's played for laughs. King Knight is not a tortured warrior. He's a self-absorbed moron who lives with his mom, probably doesn't have a job, expects everything to be handed to him on a gold platter, has absolutely no empathy for others, is incredibly fragile despite the tough air he tries to put on, and... Crap, am I playing as an Andrew Tate fan? Look, the plot is silly, and after Specter of Torment's pained tale that could fuel a whole MCR album, I'm all for it. King Knight is such a complete idiot. He's like Tamaki Suo without the charm, and seeing all his interactions with characters trying to be even the slightest bit serious is just great. And he meets a ton of people along his journey. See, since he hasn't joined the Order and taken over Pridemore Keep yet, no one refers to him as a king. So, hearing the champion of a popular card game called Joustus is called the King of Cards, he travels the land to take on the judges and the crown. Hey, when you're as desperate as King Knight, it's any port in a storm. Honestly, the story's pretty funny, and there are so many characters joining you on your adventure. Seems like every couple stages you pick up a new member to add to your airship crew. I love how so many people you meet are treating this card game like it's a big deal. It's like if Monty Python made a parody of Yu-Gi-Oh!, but not as absurd. Many of the future Order of No Quarter members show up after you beat them in battle, and you can still challenge them to card games like it's no big deal. Like, hey man, I know I just beat the living daylights out of you, but you want to play a card game? When you defeat King Pridemore, he starts flirting with King Knight's mom, and it's very cathartic seeing the reactions of our golden goofball who's just not having any of it. If you hop into this little plane on the back of the airship, King Knight just starts pretending to pilot it, and even though you can't see his face, you just know he's having the time of his life. You can pay a sloth painter to slowly make a portrait, and when he's done, you get this special command that has King Knight pull out a throne wherever he's standing. You can pay the hat merchant to revamp the whole UI because I love gold! When you're moving on ice, King Knight ice skates. This guy has a cry button. This is your hero this time, everybody. As dumb as he is, King Knight really is the big draw of the plot, being this giant beacon of stupidity and delusion, convinced he's meant to be in a lofty position of power for no other reason than because he wants to. He's such a wacky, selfish, silly character, he easily has the most personality out of the 4 protagonists. Granted, that personality would be insufferable if you knew someone like him in real life, but at least I have 3 other games in which I can beat him up if I start getting annoyed. King Knight's platforming takes a big note from Wario. This time, instead instead of a weapon, your attack and platforming trick is a shoulder tackle. Hit most surfaces or enemies, King Knight bounces into the air and starts twirling around, acting like an automatic shovel drop. Since it isn't all that different from the shovel drop, this should come naturally if you've played the original campaign. The main aspect separating it is how you can shoulder tackle in the air after bouncing off something, and you can do this every time you bounce. So a good number of levels have you tackle, then start spinning, bounce off something, and then shoulder tackle again to reach higher platform. In a way, it makes it more of a vertical traversal gimmick than before, although it can feel kind of awkward with some level design. I think it can kind of limit the sorts of obstacles that make use of the tackle, but it works well enough to be entertaining. Going to say this now, the relic equivalents, known as heirlooms this time, are mostly back to, just being extraneous. Shame, because the fire sword has great animation. I just never find myself needing to use it. I will admit though, the gyro boots are crazy fun to use and actually came up once or twice. Unfortunately, I just don't have that much to say about the core platforming itself for the campaign that I haven't said about the previous two of the previous three campaigns. I like the shoulder tackle more than Plague Knight's bombs. The spin is a fun addition that makes linking jumps a challenge, but really he feels as good to play as the other two of the previous three characters. I'm sorry, Plague Knight, I promise that's the last dig at you. But if the controls basically feel the same with a new gimmick, where's the ambition I mentioned? Well, you see, King of Cards is big, really big. Like, probably too big for its own good. The overworld's back, and I'll just let you look over it for a bit. Seems kinda like the first games, right? Just a bit squished together, plenty places to stop. Okay, now get this. This is only 1/3 of the game. Yeah, King of Cards has a different level structure than the usual reach the end of the stage layouts we're used to, instead shaking it up by offering special alternate routes that lead to hidden finishes. Not all these stages have the optional endings, but depending on which you find, you'll unlock a different path on the overworld. Now, obviously, if they made the levels the same length as in the previous campaigns, it'd be a massive pain to replay them for the hidden route, which is why the levels are much shorter. Seriously, I don't even think some of the levels in the first world have a checkpoint, and even the third and final world, they have an average of like 2, maybe 3. Compare this with the previous campaigns where levels had 4 or 5 at the very start, and it feels like their aim this time was quantity over quality. Not that they don't have quality, the levels are still really fun, but honestly, I kinda wish they just stuck to fewer longer levels. A consequence of making the levels shorter to encourage finding the hidden paths means they don't have as much interesting platforming until after you're supposed to find said paths. It makes the first halves of stages feel so boring, and I'm already struggling to remember most of these levels because so many share the same visual theme. They just blend together in my mind, and most fail to leave an impression in general. Maybe I think that because I played all these campaigns in the span of a few days and was feeling major burnout at this point, or maybe it's due to the fact that this game took me much longer than the other stories. For context, I got through Shovel of Hope and Specter Torment in a bit over 2 hours each, Plague of Shadows in roughly 3.5 hours, and King of Cards took me, do a quick bet, nearly 8 hours.
Honestly, Mum, it's too much. I feel sick.
I think a major reason for this length is the card game Joustus.
Hey, Hoodley, you talking about Joustus?
Hey, Callie. What are you doing here?
Well, obviously, I'm here to take on all challengers, big dog. You think you know card games? I'm gonna show you the true power of a real duelist.
Do you even know how to play Joustus?
No.
Oh. Okay, here's how it works. In a game of Joustus, you and your opponent take turns placing cards onto the board. The board has 3 green gems placed about, along with dead zones and other various hazards. Your goal is to fill out the playing area so there are no more moves left to be made while making sure your cards end on the spaces with the gems. Whoever has the most gems claimed at the end wins. However, you can't just smack your cards onto the gem spaces. You need to push them using the arrows on your other cards. Kind of like Go by way of dominoes, except not much like either actually. The catch is you can't place a card if there's an opposing arrow in the direction you want to push, even if said arrow is down the line from the target card you want to move. You have 3 cards in hand at all times and can see your opponent's hand, so success in Joustus requires you to think with pushing, as it were, and think a few steps ahead to take all the gems. Or you can just cheat. That works too. Best cheat by far is just flipping all the cards currently on gem spaces to your color. That won so many games. At the start, you'll only have basic arrow pushing, but pretty soon you'll have cards with various abilities like bombs or burst movements, more obstacles like rocks sealing the gem spaces, and opponents that utilize their own unique abilities against you. The more you win and the more you buy from Chester, the more powerful and unique cards you get, including characters like Shovel Knight himself, who has a freaking triple arrow, allowing you to push past all other opposing arrows. So, got all that, Callie?
You peasant! As if I needed you to teach me how to play Joustus.
But you said you didn't know.
You fool! Do you know who I am? I am King Knight, king of all cards, and no rule shall stand in the path for my glory.
Right, anyway, this card game takes a large chunk of the time spent playing this campaign, and it isn't terrible, but I can understand people not liking it. Personally, I really like it, but I'm a filthy Yu-Gi-Oh player, so my opinion probably doesn't matter that much. Your platforming journey will be occasionally interrupted by visits to local Joustus houses, housenesses if you will, where you have to locate and defeat 3 regular players before beating the local champion. The first one is actually Black Knight, who uses his pet terror pin for a game board, then he just kind of leaves us be. Man, this game really is more laid back. The best champion by far is one that's just 3 dogs, with one waking up each time you beat a corresponding opponent. See, I really like Specter of Torment's plot and tone, but this, I'm not sorry, this is exactly the kind of charming stuff I want out of these games. It's very satisfying to improve my deck over time, especially when I find a card with some crazy cool ability and never draw into it despite a deck being only 16 cards. Where is it? The main thing holding it back for me is how I'm not very good at it. If I didn't have the cheat skills, I probably wouldn't have beaten the game. It's pretty funny how when you actually go to face the Joustus judges, you don't actually beat them in the card game. No, you just fight them because King Knight found a loophole saying you just have to defeat them. Not specifically in Joustus. That was pretty funny, honestly. I think my favorite fight of them is the Trouble King, using the shoulder tackle to move this boat as your only platform to dodge his attacks while avoiding other troubles, but then positioning yourself to tackle him and start bouncing. It's so much fun. This fight is probably my favorite. But yeah, the card game after which the game is partially named is just alright. Nothing egregious, nothing amazing. I wouldn't want a whole game based around it, but I'd try it in paper if it was real. But I also tried Battle Spirit Saga, and that didn't turn out very well. So that's likely the main reason my playthrough took more than double any other campaign, but honestly the sheer number of levels are partially to blame for it as well. Not that having a bunch of levels is inherently a bad thing, even if most of them are shorter, but I could practically feel myself getting exhausted by the end. I don't have as much time to sink into these levels and enjoy them as much as the previous adventures, so all the stop and start and branching and restarts, it just got to me after a while. When they meant Ambition, I can see what they were talking about, but they might have put in too much, like a poorly made cream puff. If you do play through this campaign, and I still recommend you do, try pacing it out better than I did. By the final level, I was actually shouting at the screen, "Can you please just end already?" Which, might be a sign the game is too long for its own good. Speaking of which, let's talk about that ending. You know the deal. Buckets on heads or jump here to skip. During the third Joustus, we hear legend of the final Joustus judge, King Birder. However, despite allegedly being the strongest player in the kingdom, no one actually knows where he is. Oh hey, there he is. The fight begins with King Birder launching bouncing lasers and rotating blocks in an ever-shrinking room. Once defeated, he's revealed to be a fake, and the real final judge reveals themselves. Who could this mysterious figure possibly be? Michael Ironside? Gabriel Logan? Alucard from Symphony of the Night? Kaiba? No, it's the Enchantress. Again. Surprise! She reveals how she's been forming the Order of No Quarter while everybody else was busy playing Joustus. Wait, I thought this took place before Specter of Torment, which showed it was actually Specter Knight going around gathering the Order members? So does this take place during that story? But King Knight's not established in Primor Keep, so how exactly... You know what? I don't think it matters. Point is we have to go fight the Enchantress again, whose position as an all-powerful being is seriously coming into question if she keeps losing to so many people. So with King Knight's Fellowship united in their cause, we set out to the final world of the game. It's what we've come to expect, using previous gimmicks all in one log level. I do like how we can find a secret room decorated with Shield Knight's helmet. That's pretty cool, and it goes to show, whoa, the Enchantress card has 3 triple arrows? There's also a hidden Joustus where King Knight trips balls on some green spirit. So that's pretty fun. The final stage introduces this weird wraparound gimmick I don't think was used anywhere in the game, but I might be misremembering, and is a bit jarring. Some sections make jumps crazy awkward too, so this is where I was getting frustrated. Just, come on, jump. Make it up there, you stupid gold-foiled fool! Eventually, King Knight makes his way to the Enchantress, and all his crewmates arrive in support. The battles changed up a bit from usual, with her attacks changing up platforms a bit more often. Rat bombs are very helpful here, by the way. After we beat her, she extracts the essence of the Joustus judges, fusing them into a massive golem with headphones that would make T-Pain blush. He isn't that difficult, but the main challenge comes from not being able to do the spin bounce thanks to how his weak spots are positioned. Rats, save me! One more tackle and that's gross. And you know what happens to ugly things when King Knight's around. We show them why his drill is the drill that pierces the heavens!
Just who the hell do you think I am?
Once the golem is defeated, we see all of King Knight's supporters hanging off the platform, speaking words of support while the enchantress offers him all the riches he desires. And it's in this moment, reflecting on his journey, that King Knight reaches a realization. All this time, through the joustus duels and intense battles, he had more and more people join his cause. Their support made him stronger, more capable, and without them, it is impossible he would have made it this far. So, turning away from the enchantress, he flings his allies off the platform and takes the deal. Hey, come on! It's King Knight. Did you expect him to grow or learn or develop at all as a character? No, he's a villain. And honestly, that was pretty funny. I thought he would have some change of heart, but he just sells out everyone else so he can get what he wants. It's kind of interesting reflecting on all four heroes as a sort of spectrum for good and evil. You start with Shovel Knight, a clear-cut hero for good and justice, then Plague Knight, whose position and personality make him seem evil, but his selfish desire and hints of kindness show a warmer disposition. Followed by Specter Knight, someone we know is good-hearted, but placed in a position that forces him to be evil, and ending with King Knight just being a straight up bad guy. Now that he's technically become the King of Cards, he orders all Joustus cards be destroyed so no one can ever challenge him again. And now, with everything as he wants, King Knight dismisses King Pridemore, practically loses his own mother in her disappointment, and settles into his throne. Just as Shovel Knight shows up to put him in the ground. King of Cards is a mixed bag for me. Definitely more on the positive side, but there are just certain aspects of its design and layout I find makes the experience feel lesser than Shovel of Hope or Specter of Torment. I like the silly plot and character interactions. King Knight by himself is such an entertaining jerk. The new platforming skills are fun with the shoulder tackle and bounce, and Joustus was an interesting inclusion. However, there are so many stages, and they're so short by comparison to previous stories, they don't feel as satisfying to finish, even though they're well designed. Joustus makes sense being such a major aspect of the game, but sometimes it just feels like it's propping up the levels by adding a whole other game, and again, I think it's way too long. I've heard people taking upwards of 10 hours to finish this campaign. It's certainly ambitious, indulgent, and bigger than the previous stories, but bigger doesn't always mean better. I can't see myself going back to this campaign as often as Shovel of Hope, but unlike my thoughts on Specter of Torment, it isn't because of skill or emotional investment. It's just a really beefy game that could be trimmed down. Still a load of fun, but more of a time sink than the others. With that, I've covered all 4 central campaigns making up the treasure trove. All of them are good, well-designed platforming experiences, but here's how I rank them from least to most favorite. You know, if you wanted to know. I have no clue if you want to know, but hey, it's my video. At the bottom is of course Plague of Shadows, not a horrible experience, but by far the one I find most awkward. Then we have King of Cards, ambitious in mostly the right ways, but the design isn't really what I'm looking for with this kind of game. Then in second place we have the original Shovel of Hope, steadfast and reliable. I'm always up to replay this one, which leaves Specter of Torment in first place, having the most compelling story, the sharpest, quickest platforming challenges, and that awesome skateboarding thing. Seriously, that one tipped the scales in its favor. That's really fun. And there we have it, everyone. I've pierced the earth and dug deep, peering into all the gems Yacht Club has given us over the years. And while the legacy of Shovel Knight seems to be far from over, this is what we— oh, balls, crap, dang, fiddlesticks! I forgot the spin-offs! Alright, this video is getting long enough, and I don't really have much to say about these individually, so let's just whip a spitty through them in order of release, and hope there wasn't another thing I have to cover while I was working on this exhausting video. First up, technically not a spin-off, but also kind of is, we have Shovel Knight Showdown. This was a special bonus mode promised as a Kickstarter stretch goal, and it was released alongside the King of Cards campaign. It's a Smash clone. Jump around, smack people with your weapon, put their stocks to 0, the whole enchilada. Kind of. It still definitely feels like a tacked-on multiplayer mode you'd find in like a PS2 game or something. There are supposedly 20 playable characters, but since I didn't really bother playing with this too much, I just have the starting 8. You have a few playable modes, like a treasure clash where players compete to gather a certain number of gems, losing one if they die. There are bomb-centric ones where— take a wild guess. Every other game mode is some variation of hit the person until they run out of stocks or get the gems, and that means you'll see pretty much everything Showdown has to offer within maybe 1 hour of playing. Main thing you'll do is go through the story mode, which is baloney. Pick a character, you go through a number of stages, and there are 2 spots in particular which are just just awful. Remember that target-breaking minigame in Smash? Well, how about you go do that with Shovel Knight controls, except you need to get 2,500 points when each target only gives you 10. It's mandatory to win, and you have to do it in this visually confusing room. Sounds terrible, doesn't it? Well, that's what it does. Riveting. You know, Percy, it's a good thing you're a horse because I hear they're looking for help at the glue factory. The other annoying bit is the final boss against the Mirror of Fate, which shoots loads of projectiles, summons the Order members, tractor beams gems towards it, and just generally has way too much going on. You get a regular fight when this section is over, but I could see this being a cute novelty for a bit with friends, but even if I did have any, I only have one controller. The controls for Shovel Knight platforming just don't work as well in a fighting game context. It feels very floaty, and as a result, stages feel too cramped or too big. Each character has 3 skills, an attack, a special, and a parry you can pull off if you time a press of the shoulder button correctly. So not only are the controls not super great for a fighting game, but everyone's abilities are insanely simple. Not to say it's bad, but it definitely leans more into the nature of a chaotic party game than a good fighting game. And hey, that's what they wanted, so I guess I can't really harsh on it too much. And since this comes with the treasure trove for free, it's a decent novelty at least. And hey, you get to play as Shield Knight. That's actually pretty cool. Even then, I think you should look elsewhere to scratch that itch for a decent fighter, so basically anything besides Smash. Maybe try this new indie platform fighter called Combo Devils. It looks pretty neat. Heck, you can even play as Shovel Knight in games like Brawlhalla and Rivals of Aether, and he's an assist trophy in Smash. This just feels really weird. But if I get in the mood to bash some faces inside out and there are no CEOs around, my money's on something like Garo, or Arcana Hearts 3 Love Max, or Virtua Fighter 4, or the Rumblefish.
The Rumblefish.
Rumblefish.
Next up, we have Shovel Knight Pocket Dungeon, released on PC, macOS, Switch, and PS4 in December 2021, and later onto mobile devices in June of 2023. Dang, what took them so long on that? Pocket Dungeon is a puzzle game in the vein of something like Tetris Attack or Yoshi's Cookie, where you move your character across a grid of randomly falling enemies and obstacles, bopping into them to deal damage and clear out connecting groups. Now, I really like puzzle games, but I never actually played this until recording for this video. I thought it would just be a decent puzzle game, nothing too crazy, but fun enough. Turns out this is my favorite spin-off of Shovel Knight. Pocket Dungeon is very simple, since your only move is, well, moving, but there are a few added rules that turn it from a basic puzzler into a frantic scramble against the clock. First, whenever you hit an enemy, the enemy will hit back, and you only have so much life to spare, which means you'll have to pace yourself to make it so you don't die. Now, since I picked puzzle mode, dying just means you respawn at the top of the map, which is nightmarish when it speeds up spawning enemies while your spirit is flying to the top of the screen. So to prevent this, you have to pick up potions, and each move makes time tick forward and progress the obstacles. But you can pick up items to help you out, and even find special areas to help you get items, and man, this game is actually super fun. I like this a lot. This is great. I didn't get to play it a ton for this retrospective, but what I played of it was really fun. Bashing enemies until a long line of them explodes into gems just feels oh so satisfying. The gems bounce around for just long enough before vanishing. The little camp where you pick out your character for the run. Oh right, you can unlock other knights to play as, like Specter Knight, who heals when defeating enemies in exchange for being hurt by potions, or King Knight with his tackle charge. There's even a neat versus mode where you compete against another player or the computer to fill out the other's board. The main issue I have with this game is how quickly it becomes difficult, and not just because of the chaotic nature of the puzzle design. No, I'm talking stuff like these crystal crab things. That is way too much health, and I don't know why they made them spawn so much except to be mean. But hey, that's the nature of games like this, so I guess I just have to deal with it. It's a good thing this game is stupidly cute, or I'd be more miffed about the little irks like that. Everything has this almost pixel plushy look about it, so it looks adorable and bouncy, which is a good fit for shorter arcade-like experiences like this. I can easily see myself booting this up when I get the chance. It's just a lot of fun, and it's nice to see something so far removed from the platforming genre with Shovel Knight. You know, if I'm picking up a spin-off to something I like, I'd prefer that thing to give me a different experience as opposed to just giving me something basically the same. That's why the Persona dancing games are so good, and you're just a big ol' silly if you think otherwise. Okay, so next is not technically a spin-off, but I want to include this because when else am I going to talk about this? Shovel Knight Dungeon Duels is a board game developed by Panda Cult Games, released sometime in late 2021 or early to mid 2022. I've seen some sources say it was released in either time period, so I figured this was the best way to put it. Now, when I heard one of my favorite games of all time was getting a board game, especially with a special 3D edition packed with oodles of cool 3D miniatures, I was over the moon. I'm a big fan of board games, even if I don't get a chance to play with other people often, so you can imagine how excited I was to play Dungeon Duels. You might also have noticed what you're looking at is being played on a computer and not the physical game. This is because Dungeon Duels isn't very good. It's a good thing I tried it on Tabletop Simulator first because I'd only buy it for the miniatures, and these prices are much more than I'd be willing to pay for a middling game I know I'll never play with anyone. The goal of the board game is to travel through different levels from the original Shovel Knight campaign. Represented via long titles divided into squares, you slide down a track to mimic moving through the level. That's honestly pretty cute, and the best part about this game aside from the minis. You move across the board, dodge obstacles, jump over pits, and battle enemies to gather treasure until you fight the boss, and the one with the most treasure at the end wins. Sounds pretty simple, right? How could it possibly be bad? Because everything I just said, every action you take in this game outside of basic movement is determined via dice roll. And I am terrible at rolling dice. So the first time I tried playing this game with someone, I repeatedly jumped into a spike pit because my roll jump wasn't rolled enough jump, which was super infuriating. And there's nothing you can do because everything in this game is determined via dice roll. Sure, movement is free, but good luck getting far when there are spawning enemies and spike pits littering the floor. Boss fights see you going against one of the Order Knights, and they follow a set path according to their AI deck, for lack of a better term. This deck is not shuffled and repeats when it runs out, so you can learn the patterns and play around it. It isn't a very complicated game, and most of the charm comes from the visual design, but I don't see myself adding this to my collection unless I can get it for a crazy cheap price, and even then, it'd just be for the 3D edition for the figures. However, if anyone wants to let me know if someone on Etsy or something makes quality Shovel Knight minis, I'd be interested. The final game on this exhausting list is Shovel Knight Dig, released on September 23rd, 2022. Now let me tell you, hearing about Dungeon Duels had my attention, but this had my interest, mainly because it was being co-developed by Nitrome. Now, that name might not mean anything to you, but if you grew up playing web games in the mid to late 2000s, there's a good chance you're more than familiar with their work. Nitrome is a London-based independent studio most well known for high-quality browser and mobile games. I remember spending hours on school computers playing titles like Skywire, Dirk Valentine, Off the Rails, Final Ninja, Mutiny, Night Trap, Rubble Trouble, Headcase, just so many cool, simple, great games. Sadly, they were made in Flash, so even though the website is still up, they don't work unless you download a special program. But they are working on converting their old games to HTML5. In recent years, they've transferred to making mobile and console games like Bomb Chicken, Gunbrick, and Shovel Knight Dig. Now, knowing Nitrome, I thought this meant Dig would be a crazy cool platformer like the original, but decked out in their top-shelf cartoony pixel art. Turns out, it's actually a roguelike. Oh. Look, I'm a fan of roguelikes. I put over 200 hours into Enter the Gungeon. Nuclear Throne was literally what pushed me to get my own PC, and it's basically to me what Metroidvanias are to Some Call Me Johnny. But something about the concept of a roguelike Shovel Knight just felt off, so it took me a while to actually get around to it. Turns out, Dig's pretty nice. A new foe shows up by the name of Drill Knight, who looks like a dead ringer for Kawaki Meru Power Hand, steals Shovel Knight's treasure bag, and the Blue Burrower dives into the earth to get it back. Along the way, he'll battle through the crew known as the Hexcavators, load up on just tons of treasure, and die over and over again because that's just how these things go. Taking inspiration from titles like Downwell and Dig Dug, which yeah, that last one makes far too much sense. The goal of Shovel Knight Dig is to dig deep down and see how far you can make it while getting as much money as possible. It's much more arcade-like because of this, and drenched in that Nitrome charm I was looking for. Characters actually have better idle animations now, and the chubby cuteness of everything with the wide array of colors after going through all the 8-bit games feels like I went from reading Golden Age comics to tripping on acid while watching Climax. Actually, that sounds utterly terrifying. Point is, it looks fantastic. It plays well too. Shovel Knight has the same leaping grace one expects from Tom Cruise using a garden tool as a pogo stick, just like the first game, and the bouncy animations everything has make it feel lively. Music's fun as well, because I don't think Jake Kaufman can do wrong when it comes to soundtracks. This is definitely something I've fallen back on when I don't know what else to play, which I think is the mark of a good roguelike. But still, it is a roguelike, which means randomness and loads of failed attempts. The reason all my footage has me wearing the red armor is because it lets me take half damage, which I say is downright essential for enjoying the game. Without it, you can only take 4 hits before dying, and I'm sorry, but if you're throwing random enemy patterns at me, I'm gonna level the playing field a bit. Plus, the random nature means it won't be as satisfying as conquering a series of deliberate challenges like the main games. Would I prefer Dig to be a game with level design set in stone? Absolutely, but what we got is a decently fun arcade-style game that I'll be digging out every now and then. Plus, it and Pocket Dungeon are getting new DLC packs soon, so that'll be neat to see. Alright, I think that's just about every notable spin-off. I'm not talking about Exceed. That's a licensed crossover, not an actual spin-off. I've talked long enough already. You can't make me do that. It's refreshing to try these out after blazing through the main game, and most of what I played was decently fun, at the very least. It isn't often you can look at every branch of a property and have the worst thing you can say about something be, it's just kind of okay. So props to you, Yacht Club Games, for maintaining a solid, consistent quality with your main property. Looking forward to Mina the Hollower. Now, following suit with the main games, let's rank the spin-offs according to the most objective criteria, my entirely subjective opinion. Dead last is definitely Dungeon Duels. It's just a middling board game with great presentation. Then we have Showdown, which is a fun novelty but lacks the depth to be a satisfying fighting game. Runner-up is Shovel Knight Dig, which has a lovely presentation courtesy of Nitrome and can be a solid arcade title, but the random nature makes it not as satisfying as the main titles, which of course leaves Pocket Dungeon as my favorite of the batch. It's just a really enjoyable, frantic puzzle game, and I will almost always prefer something different when it comes to spin-offs. I'll pick this one to play over the others every day of the week. But hey, surely there's someone out there who wants to share their thoughts on this specific nugget of chivalry. What do you think, Grey Jinjo?
What? I don't know why you're asking me. I have never played any Shovel Knight games.
Okay, I think that's everything. At the end of the day, shovel puns, I'm tired. Goodbye.